Welcome to Disengaged, the podcast. I'm Leah Harding, your host. Something that I did not think was on my 2025 bingo card was needing a man to explain something to me, but here we are. We've got a guy in the studio on Disengaged for the first time ever. He's been single, boyfriend, engaged, disengaged, reengaged,
to the same person.
married, divorced, single.
Yeah, repeat the cycle of boyfriend, single, boyfriend, single. Yeah.
Podcast
Let's
guest.
not go through the entire hierarchy of my life here. Seems a little personal. We're going to do digital timestamps on this. That would be a
Vulnerability is the number one trait that we bring to this podcast. Are you willing to be vulnerable today?
Yes, very much so. I also think that the only acceptable hangover in your late 30s is a vulnerability hangover.
So tell me, who are you? How do we know each other? Do your own intro.
Wow, okay.
You're a guy, so.
I would be curious hearing how you would introduce me, but I guess if you're giving me the spotlight, I will say I'm Aaron, for the record. We know each other through mutually shared interests, i.e. trauma, and also Hinge.
Whoa.
If you're looking to find people that have stories to tell about failed relationships, people in their 30s on Hinge probably have at least one good tale to tell.
Yeah, if you want to start a podcast about, failed relationships, it's a great resource.
Yeah, I do feel a little misled. I didn't know that, it was not one of your prompts you didn't have your podcast at the time, but it was not a prompt on Hinge that you wanted guests for your podcast.
I actually did, though, with other guys that I was talking to on Hinge. I did float the idea.
Wow.
Because people are like, have you ever been married? Do you have kids? And I'd
Is
be
that
like,
how the Hinge
no.
men talk?
Yeah. Something
No
like
wonder I was doing it wrong.
But, I would float around the idea of don't you think that if more people ended engagements, then fewer people would get divorced? And they'd be like, whoa, that's deep. And I'd be like, so what about you? And they'd be like, I'm still working on finalizing my divorce. And I'd be like, okay.
Nice.
Great. Not the kind of person I want on a podcast. I want someone who can maybe have their trauma a little bit more in the rear view.
Yeah. And I think, it was 15 minutes into probably us talking when I think it came up through the questions you were asking that I had been married previously.
Yes.
And you were so happy with that result. You were like, oh, I knew it. I could tell.
You can
in a positive way, apparently. But
yeah, you know when someone's been married.
Yeah.
Or else has 3 sisters.
That's oddly specific. I do, in fact, have 3 sisters, but you knew
crazy.
that. Yeah.
No, but it's it's got to be one of the two, because you're coming at a conversation, you just know a little too much nuance to not have had a woman close to you for an extended period of time that's not your mother.
Someone who has caused me harm as well as helped me grow as an individual.
Yeah. That comes out real quick when you're chatting with someone. You're
Sure.
like, they've been there.
I think that extends pretty broadly, though, into other areas of your life as well. You can kind of tell when somebody just doesn't have life experience. It doesn't have to be relational,
Right.
You can tell when somebody's never left the country or,
Yeah.
lives in Nebraska and has spent their entire life there. Self-burn. Just kidding. I haven't spent my entire life there, but that's where.
He is from Nebraska. They do exist.
Yeah. But I got out,
Yeah.
You do
That's the
have
only
to,
way we know they exist.
Yeah. The only way to
they
leave the state,
leave.
actually, as a person who is a native, is to escape through an elaborate corn maze.
Yeah. Either. But
Yeah.
okay, so you dropped the big bomb here. This is why you're on the pod.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've been married.
You're right. I have been not
You've done the
disengaged,
thing.
but divorced, which I guess is the ultimate disengagement. Hindsight, not saying that there were signs or there were clues. We'll unpack that. That'll be a teaser right there. But it would seem like it would have been less work to just not get married.
Right.
But hindsight
expensive.
is 2020. It was a pretty affordable wedding, but
No, the divorce.
oh yeah, that was real bad.
Yeah. I'm saying if you had disengaged
Sure.
this person,
Yeah.
then, the divorce wouldn't have needed to happen. And that,
Right.
of course, is a huge reason to disengage. If you're already looking down the tunnel and you're like, wow, this divorce is going to suck.
Yeah. Hopefully people aren't in that situation, but if you are and you do genuinely feel looking at getting married to somebody, oh, this divorce, I wasn't going into this with the expectation that it would end in divorce. So I don't think there were those signs. in the traditional way. You know, I'd like to believe that if I was in a situation where I had that kind of like, oh, there's not a light at the end of the tunnel, there's, you know, a train coming at full speed and it's going to crush me. You know, I'd like to believe that I would have bailed. But because of my background, being raised in the church and, you know, being kind of like curated to think that this is just a logical progression in a relationship, right? You date, you get engaged, you get married, you have kids. Thankfully, I got out before the having kids step. So I guess there was some, that sounds very callous to say, but
No, it's true,
made
though.
it made the separation less strenuous.
So you've been in the very spot that like I was dreading when I was engaged, of you get to this point where you're like, this just isn't working.
Right.
And I knew at some point, but then I kept going along with it.
Mm.
And like, was there a point for you where you look back on and you're like, I knew enough at one point in time, maybe like even when you were engaged, were there moments where you were like, this doesn't feel like it's going to be successful?
Interesting. I would say not during the engagement per se, but this should have been a huge indication. But like beforehand, there was a period of time where I had broken up with this person. And, you know, because at that point I was like, you know, we're young. Like, I don't necessarily like know what I'm doing with my life, what my goals are, whatever. But I allowed the voice of the church narrative of like, oh, well, you know, like people can change. You know, you can choose to grow together or grow separately. Like, you know, this is a logical progression of your relationship. Relationships are hard, you know. So I fell very, very quickly on the trope that because relationships aren't always easy, that if there were signs, that I just needed to try harder. So I think I put blinders on pretty quickly going back into the relationship. And then it's like, you're in the lane. The only next stop is to get engaged.
Because you've already broken up and now you've decided to get back together. So you can't get back out of it because you were just out of it and decided to come back into it, which means you were wanting to escalate it to the next level.
Right, exactly. It's like once you've, you know, experienced doubt, you're not allowed to experience it again.
Right. It's so
like,
true.
You've gone through your trials, you know, trial by fire, and, you know, you've prayed on it, and now it's all good. Because it really did just feel like this is what the expectation is, you know.
Like you didn't have a choice in a way?
Well, yeah, it's like if you chose to date this person, you know, you're dating with intention. You know, I was one step removed from like the level of Christianity where it was like a courtship. Like you're just following the track, you know, like once you get on the track, you can't get off, you know.
And when you did propose then, if you were kind of in this rote kind of pattern, because I felt that on my end as a woman of like, well, this is what you're supposed to do, cold feet and all. You know, like if you're nervous, well, that means this, you know, it's a big decision. Of course you're nervous. But was what then became your fiance, was she showing any signs of trepidation?
Well, so it's interesting because like when we broke up, she was the one that was like the aggressor, if you will, in pursuing like getting back together, right? Originally, and maybe this is my attempt at trying to break part of the pattern in the narrative, originally I had proposed. And then like 24 hours later, we hadn't told anyone or anything like that. She was like, no, I want to do this differently, because I hadn't gone to her father and asked for permission, because even back then I was not, you know, attempting to steer into the narrative of like women or property, you know, which I feel like is
positive.
Yeah, right. I thought
that was very forward of you.
Yeah, very forward thinking. Like young Aaron was much wiser than, you know, I give him credit for at times.
Right.
He was a complete, you know, idiot for the rest of the time, you know, but like there were some positive glimmers, you know, especially in like the Midwest, being raised Methodist. She was Southern Baptist. It's a power combination right there.
It really
you know,
is.
like she was like, well, I don't think this is like, you know, the right way to do it. So, you know.
But do you think that was true? Do you think that really was her concern, was that it wasn't the right way to do it? Or do you think that was her saying, I need something to point to get me out of this. And that's the closest thing that I don't really have to take responsibility for.
It could be. It didn't feel that way at the time. And it certainly didn't change her answer, when I proposed a second time. But because now it was like it had gone through the proper channels,
So you proposed, she was like, hold up.
First she said yes, and then like 12 to 24 hours later in a Barnes and Noble, she was like, ooh, so I was thinking.
Did you see that in the Barnes and Noble as like oh, thank God, I've been set free?
No.
Like this could be a good reason for me to walk away? Or was it like, okay, fine, I'll go talk to your dad?
Well, I think we had like an attempt at a mature conversation about the reasoning, and like she presented actual reasons, predominantly being, I hadn't asked for permission and she wanted her family, who was never really a big fan of the relationship, which also, as an aside, maybe people should be a little bit more respectful of their family's opinions when it comes to their family being like, yo, your boyfriend sucks, like,
yeah.
It is interesting.
That happened to me too.
Yeah. And it's like, and you don't want that. You don't want to feel that way as an adult. And you kind of instantly like go into the rebellion stage of like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. You know?
I'm going to show you all the reasons why this is going to work. And then that's where all of your effort goes.
And not to jump ahead in the storyline, but like, I also think that kind of like, I'm going to prove you wrong, combined with Christian upbringing, set me up for massive failure when I was starting to see problems in the relationship when we were married, because now it's like I've been conditioned to be the spiritual leader, and I'm doing air quotes in the studio right now, because like, what is that even, like I'm a young 20-something-year-old, and so I feel like I then stayed in it longer than I should have, because I was brought up almost to believe that I had done something wrong or I wasn't doing enough. So I thought the things that were becoming issues in our relationship were, even if they had to do with like her choices, they still reflected on me, because I was supposed to be, in charge or, leading the growth of our family,
Well, which is so isolating.
Oh, yeah. And it definitely, even when like things had fallen apart and I was like living out of my office, I hadn't told.
Like not at home?
Right, yeah. I hadn't told anyone, So like I would get up before anyone else came into the office building, and I'd like go down to the YMCA and, pretend to work out, but actually I'd just go shower, and then I'd come into the office and everyone would be like, wow, you're such a go-getter, you're always here.
Wow.
Thankfully it was my office, so I had that excuse, the reason to be there, but still.
But that's how deeply it was ingrained that you need to make this work.
Oh, yeah.
And like, you're clearly doing something wrong.
And we're talking like, 6-7 months.
Air quotes on that one too.
Right, right. They didn't feel like air quotes at the time though,
Yeah.
But no, like going to family gatherings and like covering for her not being there, just to kind of deflect from what was really going on. And that was something that I had seen modeled in other, relationships of people, that were close to me, is the fact that like in private there might be issues, but publicly, they kind of just like smooth the frosting, they're just like, we're not going to address it. You don't talk about how much money you make, your political ideology, or whether or not you're happily in a relationship.
Or sleeping in your office.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, it didn't feel, like I had a support network or group, which is so ironic considering, there's this big push in the church to be like everything you need, to support you, to build you up, to help you grow as a person. But then there were a few instances where I did try to like talk to people about it. And it was very much so kind of like probably what you experienced when you were like experiencing their cold feet. People were just like, well, like it's scary. There's a lot going on, but just think about how good it's going to be.
Right.
It was a lot of, well, just need to pray on it. Marriage isn't easy. God will give you direction. A classic one-liner, And so again, I'm sure I could have done a better job, communicating what was really going on. But because there's this idea, and combined with the male ego, where like I'm supposed to have an idea of what's going on. I'm supposed to be in control in some semblance. It's very difficult, especially when you haven't seen it modeled in any other relationships that you've been exposed to. It's very difficult to actually like come forward and say, hey, this isn't okay. I'm not okay. Here's what's going on. What can I do? You can choose to grow as an individual or grow with your partner. And I think that, we both chose to grow as individuals, but not together. They tell you that like, oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be incredible because of all the things that come after. But then it's like when you sit down with your mortgage lender, they're like, okay, well, now you have to go through all these 55 steps. Same thing with the engagement. Now you got to go through all these 55 steps. You're stressed and everyone's just saying, just get through it.
Yeah.
Just keep your head up,
Did you do pre-marriage counseling?
So we went to another church that was doing a group kind of like pre-marriage counseling thing.
Were any of them licensed?
Oh, I'm sure not.
Mm-hmm.
We only went to one because there were so many things in it that were just kind of like almost became like jokes within our relationship. And you could argue that, maybe that if we had actually sought out like real premarital counseling, like it would have ended differently, or like maybe we would have called things off. I don't know that that's true because again, like, these are instances like you had previously said, like obviously you did care about this person.
Yeah,
of course you love them. There's a reason why, like, you stayed with them as long as you did, and you even said yes when they, proposed, even though you had those anxieties, because it is something that's hard to reconcile, caring about a person and then having that person either change, like in my instance, or, potentially start to showcase the behaviors of like, oh, well, I don't know that I actually want like a life with this person, or I don't know that I'm ready for this. It took me into my 30s as a guy to recognize that, because immediately, especially when it's somebody you care about, they have a problem, you want to provide solutions, right?
Right.
But oftentimes that's not at all what's productive. You deep down inside may actually know what the solutions you need to do are, but you're just trying to like verbally process, or like you just need support. It's so easy to rationalize to yourself that this is probably like, it's okay. You're like, well, it might not be the best. I might not be happy, but it's better than not having someone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear programmed into people where their like self-worth is taken into question. And like that was partially like one of the reasons why I stayed in the marriage as long as I did. I think there was bleed through from the idea that like I'm supposed to be a spiritual leader in my household. And so because I was out of control in that, I doubled down in other areas of my life, like especially like professionally, where I was like super like micromanagey, because I was like, this is something I can control. But learning that you don't have to control things, or that sometimes like it's not even about control,
Yeah.
That's not the real issue on the table, So I think,
What would you say the real issue is?
I think, it varies, but I think oftentimes it's more so, there's an unaddressed elephant in the room that you are avoiding by trying to regain control of something else. You're deflecting from your actual fear and just like, taking control of a situation to make yourself feel like you can control something, which can have its benefit, especially if you're on the precipice of a panic attack.
I ran an ultra marathon when I was trying to figure out how to end my engagement.
Yeah.
Like I just straight up ran 91
You're
kilometers.
built different. That's crazy.
I was like, I know, I'm going to control like my body in a way that can be perceived as healthy, but probably wasn't like the best for me. It's not great to have a podiatrist tell you that your feet look like you've been pregnant. I was like,
that would be a little humbling.
Like, oh wow, so I'm probably running too much.
Yeah.
But that's so interesting that when you like, that's kind of like a telltale sign, right? Like when you're hyper controlling other areas. I haven't thought of it that way. So how do you feel like you took all the nuggets of wisdom from your, here we go, engagement, disengagement,
engagement
marriage,
again. Well, no, you gotta get
re-engagement.
Oh yeah.
And then marriage, and then divorced, and then single journey.
Yeah.
What have you taken from that into life? Like, what do you feel like has made you stronger about? How has that made you stronger? And then into other relationships.
This is loaded. This is the real
Juicy.
meat. This is the real meat of the conversation. It took a lot to build up to the point where, I was able to say, no, I need to leave. And while I did learn from that, that it's okay to admit failure, and it's okay to advocate for yourself, and it's okay to not have everything figured out. I think that was the big hurdle, but that allowed me to learn more about myself in the coming years in other relationships. So I think, and it's interesting because you would assume that I would have like pivoted hard and I would have just gone into a bunch of like short-term relationships, but like all my relationships since then have been like multi-year. Because, even though like I'm not, following the script of the church, I'm still dating with intention. Like I don't just casually date people,
right?
Because if I'm investing in this person and they're investing in me, like I'm doing that because I see potential or a future, and it's only everything's so much clearer when you look back.
Yeah,
but it's only since
you also don't think someone's bad when you're with them,
right? And you really do an excellent job of like rationalizing.
Yes,
and it's or standing up for them. If other people call them out on it, because everyone. Always, if they have like a bad relationship or whatever, and then after they break up, everyone's like, we hated your boyfriend or we hated your girlfriend. Everyone's always like, well, I wish you would have told me. The thing is, you don't. Like the number of times that I've been in a situation where the next time they dated somebody who was crappy, I went to them and I was like, hey, you remember last time? And they're like, they ice you out as a friend. They cut you out.
Right.
Because I mean, deep down inside, they may already know, but they don't want to hear it.
Right.
It's the same thing as like, somebody's parents saying you shouldn't date. It's been a very slow learning process, with every single like relationship. Like I've learned more about myself. I like to think I'm in a healthy relationship now, open communication. It doesn't mean that there aren't obstacles or like hard conversations to have, but like knowing that you have somebody that you can rely on and is going to listen to you. And even if they don't like what you have to say, they're going to let you say it and not just immediately tell you you're wrong or you shouldn't feel that way. Really, the responsibility to try harder in the future and do a better job of being more conscientious of the effect our words can have, like.
And the impact of committing to something.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
I think it's hard for an underdeveloped brain to really know that. I feel like my brain has only just started working a month ago.
I feel like COVID, in the context in which it did happen, set me back developmentally.
Oh, for sure. 100% I agree.
And that's a tough one to swallow because you're like, I'm supposed to like grow as a person and
it's like, great, I'm 25 again.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question of the hour. Would you get married again?
Up until recently, I never thought I would.
Why?
Because I thought that, and it turns out that, you want to talk about like signs looking back as to why a relationship probably shouldn't work out. The relationships I've been in since then, I've had a hard time seeing myself getting married to these people. But I've always thought it was because I got burned by marriage, and I thought I was like, if I'm committed to this person and they're committed to me, like I don't need this outward, like sign for everybody else. Like I don't need the tax benefits, whatever. But no,
we all kind of would. I mean,
they're really not as good as you think they are. Like
really.
I mean,
bummer.
I guess it's all objective.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, it's like depending on what tax bracket you're in, like
I guess it's like the thing of like jump in the water, it's great. You get a huge tax write-off.
Right? Yeah.
You don't.
Your car
you
insurance.
heard it here first.
Your car insurance goes down, and you get some tax benefits
until you have a son who's driving.
Yeah, and then you got to wait until he's 26.
And then you're child poor. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the original question. Let's put a nice firm pause in here so it can be stitched back together.
Leah over analyzing and losing track of the topic? No.
Hey, I've dodged so many unintentionally, but like I have a tendency to just ramble, like word vomit, because it's how I process. Because a lot of the stuff's things that I haven't thought about, in a decade plus.
Your brain has so many tabs open.
Yeah.
On its computer screen.
It does. Now that I'm older and more mature, I realize that it was just because I was like rationalizing not fully committing to someone. Because it does seem kind of interesting that like we still live in a world where like marriage, even outside of the church, is such a goal for so many people. And while I don't know that it's necessarily like this huge goal for me, it's not like, the end all be all. Like I actually am excited about the prospect, and that's a very different feeling. And now looking back, I recognize that the reason I wasn't excited, and I was telling myself that like I didn't need the institution of marriage to feel commitment from this person, was probably because like, something wasn't right.
Well,
let's talk about you for a minute.
Okay, what about me?
Do you feel that because you grew up in the church and the role that the woman is expected to play, that perpetrated, maybe not the right word. Perpetuated. Thank you. Okay. Let me try that again. Do you feel like
we're going to keep that because I
humbling.
Sound smart.
It's humbling. Well, I'll still repeat it just in case you don't want to keep it. Do you feel like your role growing up in the church as a woman perpetuated the notion that you should make other people feel better about themselves? And I'd also like to say for the record, you still do that. During the Kendrick Lamar halftime show, you said, I think that's Kendrick Lamar back there sitting, on top of that car.
Oh, before the halftime show.
Before it technically started.
When you're like looking over.
Yeah, you saw him back
ESPN
there and you were like,
shoulders.
instead of telling everyone that's Kendrick Lamar and sounding authoritative, you were like, oh, I think that's Kendrick Lamar. And then there's me being like, I don't know that
That's
is.
Weird.
Why would he be crouched?
Yeah.
Why would he be crouched on a car for 5 minutes before the show starts?
And I'm like, well, just an
Performers
idea.
do crazy things, Yeah, and then it was. So
right.
So do you think that like those like pre-programmed moments in time and like how you were conditioned within the church carries over in like modern day life still?
Well, I think there's a fine line between being really confident and being like a dick.
Yeah.
Being like, okay, I actually know that. But then it's good when you can open it up as like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is my flag on the play, if you will, to keep the NFL thing going. But it's like maybe someone else has like a really solid reason why that's not the case. And I think maybe that's my journalism background of like, I'm not going to say an absolute. I want someone else to say it because then that's the soundbite you can use.
Right.
Like I can't use my own soundbite.
Yeah, it would be confirmation bias kind of thing.
Right. So like you throw it out there and then it's like, okay, yeah, sure enough, that's who it is. I think though, like you said, it's such a journey. Like I become more sure of what that voice is. I think I used to think that it was the voice of God, honestly.
Yeah.
In the sense that like God, like a higher being is telling me something about how I'm feeling. Not like that's Kendrick Lamar crouching on the stage. Not that kind of information, but like, hey, like this person, like flag it or yes, no, opinions like that. I was like, oh, like I'm clearly like praying and like doing all the right things to the point that I'm like more in tune with God. And so that must be it. And not even owning that, like it would even possibly be my inner knowing and like my life experiences amounting to that moment to make a rational decision about something. It was like, even that was passing the buck. Like, well, it's not me,
Yeah.
Like, well, I just think it's Kendrick Lamar. Like, it's just me. Like,
It's
maybe
just
it's not
me.
But then I don't do that in some areas, but
Sure. Areas where it maybe matters more.
Yeah, but then I think those Kendrick Lamar moments do matter.
Yeah.
Like I think saying things like that more authoritatively, I think helps work out that muscle and build it up to make it easier to recognize when actually something's not going great.
Yeah.
Like a relationship that I was in last year, it came to a point where I was like, no, like I woke up in that relationship a lot quicker than I ever have before. Where it was like I was able to very clearly make decisions for myself, delayed still,
Sure.
but faster, like within 6 months from start to finish, which is pretty good for me, considering that I'm also like you. I am like you date someone for a few years kind of a thing.
Right.
And it was like, okay, I'm seeing signs now and I'm calling that as I see it and saying, no, actually, you lied to me. No, what you said wasn't true. And then it's like, I'm breaking up with you. And it's like, what? And it's like, yeah, this is the end.
Mm-hmm.
I have ended my relationship with you. Let me be very clear. Whereas like, I wouldn't have done that. I would have like, I called one guy on the phone once because I was like, I can't even say this to their face. And I just allude to it so much to the point where they're like, are you breaking up with me? And then I'm like, yes, because I didn't even have the bravery to say that out loud.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't be like back then I would have just said to myself, I think that's Kendrick Lamar squatting on the stage by that car.
Right.
But now I'm at least saying it out loud. So I see progress in all of that.
Yeah. And I really think that you hit on something that I don't think I've thought about in regards to people labeling their intuition as like the voice of God. Because it does make sense as to why like religion, you know, is as popular and pervasive in, you know, all cultures, not just Christianity, because it does help you like soften the sense of responsibility a little bit, because it is scary to trust your gut, you know, especially with the big things, you know, so feeling or labeling it as like, oh, what I'm feeling inside is like a divine calling, you know, you're suddenly, it's easier. And people, especially like within the church, people are more likely to believe you if you said, oh yeah, like I prayed on it and God is telling me. And like, that's not to say that like God isn't telling you through your own intuition, but it is interesting that it's so much easier to, it's like sugarcoating something, you know, it's so much easier for other people to swallow if you wrap it up in that nice little package of like, this isn't just how I feel. This is like something that I feel, you know, a divine being is imparting to me.
Okay, I think this is a good time to bring in some listener mail that we got out of Canada. This is from Tasha. She says, what do you think that voice of God was? Do you think that was your desire? Do you think God's will kind of changes for you over time? I'm just curious to hear more about what you think about that critical feeling. So that's in regards to the episode where I was like, you know, on the sand dune and I was like, God just told me that I'm going to marry this dude.
Yeah.
Like, do I really think that that was the voice of God? You know,
kind of. It's just the fact that there was only like 1,900 other people you could possibly date.
Or that I was on a sand dune with one other person.
Yeah.
So like, do I think that that was the voice of God? I think I was convinced then that it was. And like what you were saying, that the voice of God can influence your subconscious and whatnot. But I don't know if like the voice of God really changed or I changed what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Like I also didn't have verbiage for it to not be the voice of God. Like if you have this strong inkling or a strong feeling and you weren't aware of it previously, then it must be from God. It can't be you.
Yeah.
That was like how I would perceive it then. And so to have like that much clarity about something without having like really real information at the time, I think it was just more of a feeling.
Yeah. But it also seems very relatable that it's like a gut feeling, a reaction. So it's not necessarily that God's will changed or evolved over time. It's just that you had more information to work with, you know?
Right. I think the voice though, or that knowledge that I felt I gained that night of you're going to marry this guy, it probably was saying you would be really good friends with this guy.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, by friends, you mean marriage, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, historically, like what female friendship can you have in the church?
Well, that's a whole other podcast, you know?
Right.
But like, I think he and I would have just been really good friends. Like, I don't think it needed to go to the level that it did.
Do you think that when you had that like gut feeling, like, did you already know that like he really wanted to get married? Was this like something that was on his priority list? Had he communicated that?
Yes, he had communicated that to me. So I knew that.
So do you feel like that influenced how you felt? Like the fact that there was a little tiny spark, but then you knew that he also wanted to get married. Did you just autocomplete?
I think the opposite. I think because of my personality type, knowing that he wanted to get married, I was like,
Not gonna happen.
Not. Like, literally.
Well,
no.
I guess technically you followed through on that.
Like, good luck with that. That's where that comes from. Like, right. Yeah. Because he wanted to get married, I was like, no.
Yeah.
And then to have this like, well, maybe I could moment. And then it's like, well, this actually kind of feels more than a you could. It kind of feels like a directive, like a divine directive.
Yeah.
But what do I think that actually was? I think that was a desire that I had that I hadn't really been aware of, that I actually did want to get married at some point. But I think I was having that realization with this guy and kind of married those two concepts together. No, but I think that like God obviously can influence you and speak to you in ways that are different for different people. But I was pretty dead set that that was it. But then for me to not marry him, then am I going against the will of God? And there is that whole element, this whole fear thing. I'm like, well, if I heard it so clearly, like, then what is everything within me screaming that this is a bad thing?
Yeah.
It's like, does God really want me to have to submit to this guy? Like, or have I now learned information that like I don't have to continue on with this?
Yeah. So maybe there was a question mark that you missed on the end of it. It's like, it was more of a, you could marry this guy, right?
Right.
Not, you will marry this man.
Right. I think so.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to like wrap your intuition around like it being the voice of God, because it's easier it's less scary to talk about it in that regard, because then it's like, it's not just you feeling this way. It's you feeling led, in a divine manner. You didn't have years of seeing how you guys operated as a couple. You didn't have years of thinking about submitting to this person.
Also, when people tell you when you know, then you're like, well, then what is that? So if I felt like I knew, then that was it.
Yeah.
Like, there's no guide map other than random people in your life giving you these little vignettes, and you like cling on to them, and you're like, this must be it.
Well, and problematically, like just the fact that I started dating someone, it, with the cultural mindset of when like it just felt like, okay, well, you're dating them, so like now, like it just has to follow the natural progression, like like there's no off ramp.
There's no off ramp, and now this is your end of free will. Yeah. You only have one decision to make with a partner, and it's, do you want to date them or not? And like, if you say yes to dating, then on all aboard.
And like when I had broken up with my partner and then ended up, well, I guess I'll say I broke up with my girlfriend and then ended up like taking them back or getting back together with them. Was I listening to, God's will, or was I just tired of being pestered to take them back? Right. Because, they wore you down. They were, yeah, exactly. It did kind of feel that way. But then it's also like, there's the other side of it where you feel
that was God saying, leave Nebraska.
I should have listened. But there's the other side of it where it's like, you also are conditioned to feel like if someone is putting this much effort into getting you back, they must really care about you. Right.
Well, I was the one putting in the effort, because I also called it off with my boyfriend. Yeah. Who I ended up getting engaged to.
I'm pretty confident if you break up with someone, you should never get back together with them. And I know, again, it's like one of those things. It doesn't apply to everyone. It's a general statement. It's like saying, you do know people that got married in their 20s and they're still together and they appear to be happy. Awesome.
Yeah, a lot of my family's that way. Yeah. I also have family that have gotten married after they broke up, and it's like, cool, good for you.
Yeah. But I do feel like there's a lot of instances where if you feel like you have good enough reason to break up with a person, that maybe you should trust that a little bit more and not let, society, the other person, their family, your mutual friends tell you otherwise. After like my last relationship, people were like, well, if they changed their mind, would you take them back? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I have too much self-respect. I finally have self-respect. Like, I'm not.
I just got
like,
it.
yeah, exactly. Like,
You know how hard I fought for this?
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Right.
It's taken years.
Yeah. And you're just going to give it back? Yeah.
Right.
No, I think there's a lot of truth into that. I think heartbreak is so powerful that it makes you want that drug back at all costs.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was why I ended up wanting to get back together with my ex-boyfriend.
Yeah.
Because I was so like chemically addicted to the kind of relationship that we did have. Like we were both able to travel so much because of our jobs and like together, and we were in like a smaller town in a big city kind of a feeling, and like to be constantly reminded of what you don't have makes you drive even harder to try to get that back.
Sure.
And I think that the backstory to that, or the motives there, are not enough reason to actually justify the getting back.
But it does make sense.
But it can feel like it, because you're like, if I can just get back with this person, then all of this anguish I have right now, this like literal heartbreak, will go away.
And I imagine, though, that was heavily compounded by the fact that you were part of like a expat community. You were part of a church group. Like,
where else are you going to go?
Yeah, exactly.
The other church.
You had such a limited like group of people that were in the same sphere as you, that it probably did feel very isolating to be all of a sudden like having broken up.
Like if you want normal back, you got to try to find a way to get back together with the guy.
Right.
Because your normal is not going to look the same.
Yeah, you just alienated half the people that in this other country.
Right. So do what you can to change that, to rectify that.
Right.
So I think you do a lot when you're broken up with, or you've broken up with the person, if the suffering is so bad that you just think, well, then I must go back to it, and you relapse, if you will, relational relapse.
Right. It's also like getting back to something that at least and you're quote unquote comfortable with,
even though what could be even like unhealthy family patterns from your parents that you're addicted to, and you end up dating people like that, and that's a whole other podcast. But
yeah.
Do you have 9 hours, listener?
We got trauma.
Yeah.
We could talk about it.
Well, I feel led to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
That's fine.
I don't want to.
No. All good things.
But I'm going to self-advocate here.
Yeah.
Aaron, I just want to say thank you so much for coming in the studio. We're in like a real studio, by the way.
This feels so official.
It is official.
Yeah, no.
It's Disengaged the podcast. It's official.
I know, but it's just like, I didn't know when you were like, come on my podcast.
It's not a one-person production.
Yeah, there's cats and dogs involved.
Yeah, it's a whole studio. Yeah. But we're in a legit studio.
No, this is incredible. Thank you for having me. Hopefully what I said makes sense.
I live here.
And if not, maybe this will get you more listener mail, because people are like, the one time you have a guy on and he doesn't make any sense, which would be totally fine.
No, you made so much sense.
Okay.
I learned a lot about you, myself, and this whole circus that we're trying to unravel. Thank you.
Some bonus facts about Nebraskans.
That's all we really came here for.
I mean, it's just icing on the cake,
Can you please end this with the state tagline for Nebraska?
I think it's Nebraska. It's not for everyone. But this podcast is.
This podcast was a production of the Anthology Group.